Welcome. We're here to go over the gun policy issue of ghost guns. And if you find the term ghost guns confusing, don't worry, you aren't alone.
We feel the same way because it doesn't accurately explain the various factors and policy layers part of this particular gun policy discussion.
Ghost guns have recently come to the forefront of national gun policy discussions and legal debates, but it's a complicated issue to unpack.
So, to help us better understand and learn more about this topic, we have tried to break down what ghost guns are, how they're different from other traditionally made guns, and why it matters.
Today, I'm announcing several initial steps my administration is taking to curb this epidemic of gun violence. Much more need be done, but the first, want to rein in the proliferation of so-called ghost guns.
In May 2021, 1 month after that announcement from President Biden, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF, released what's called a proposed rule intended to address ghost guns. Yet despite this move by the ATF, there is still widespread confusion and a general lack of awareness about what these guns are, the problems associated with them, and why it matters when it comes to public safety. The ATF's proposed rule was publicly accessible online for all to read and submit comments for 90 days. But it's a dense 34-page document full of legal jargon with references to decades-old federal policy definitions, making it hard to quickly and easily get an idea for what this proposed rule will actually change in the event it becomes law versus what we can expect in the event it does not.
To understand ghost guns, we need to understand how the ATF currently defines a firearm and how that relates to the ways that guns are marked and traced. The ATF's definition of a gun includes frames and receivers, which are the primary structural component of guns. Frames and receivers typically provide housing for all of the other pieces of a gun. Under federal law, guns, including frames and receivers, manufactured by federally licensed companies, must be marked with a serial number, manufacturer name, and other identifying information. If a gun is recovered from a crime scene, law enforcement can use this information to trace guns and identify their origins. On the other hand, ghost guns, which the ATF calls privately made firearms, or PMFs, are not made by licensed manufacturers. Private individuals can assemble them from separate parts. These parts can be purchased either individually or as part of a kit, or 3D printed. Many of these parts, kits, and designs are readily available online. Whether a privately made firearm is built from a kit or individual parts, assembly usually involves a partially complete frame or receiver. These parts, often called 80% receivers, require some machining before they can be combined with other parts of the gun. Under current ATF guidance, these incomplete receivers are not firearms until they have been fully machined. As a result, the incomplete receivers do not need to carry a serial number or any other identifying information. Unless the individual making the privately made firearm adds markings, the completed gun will not have a serial number. When recovered by law enforcement, these guns are usually untraceable. It is difficult for law enforcement to know who made them and used them. As a result, these guns are often called ghost guns.
Privately made firearms are therefore largely indistinguishable from traditionally manufactured guns and are similarly lethal. Unfortunately, because these guns are untraceable, and because gun data is often difficult to acquire in general, we don't know very much about how often these guns are used in violence. When the ATF first published its notice of proposed rulemaking, they provided some aggregate data on the number of privately made firearms recovered by law enforcement at potential crime scenes and reported them to the ATF. From January 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2020, the ATF received reports of 23,906 suspected privately made firearms. The number of recoveries increased every year to a maximum of 8,712 privately made firearms in 2020. Of the 23,906 recovered in that 5-year period, 325 were related to homicides or attempted homicides. From January 2016 to March 2021, the ATF made 23,946 attempts to trace a suspected privately made firearm and only succeeded 151 times. Some local law enforcement agencies have also started reporting city-level data. right here in our local city of Baltimore, police saw a 400% increase in recoveries between 2019 and 2020. Baltimore's Police Commissioner Michael Harrison testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee about the trends they've seen in privately made firearms.
Last year, Baltimore had a 300% increase in the number of ghost guns that have been seized in our city. Of those seizures, Baltimore police linked 15 of those ghost guns to a shooting or a homicide. The Southwestern District, which experiences the most gun crimes and homicides in the city, also had the highest number of ghost guns seized. And most disturbingly, nearly 1/4 of all of the ghost guns recovered by the Baltimore police were from individuals who were not old enough to obtain a firearm, including an individual who was only 14 years old.
Philadelphia has seen similarly large increases in privately made firearm recoveries, with 99 in 2019 and 250 in 2020. So far in 2021, Philadelphia and Baltimore are on pace to recover even more than that in 2020.
Privately made firearms also may pose a problem because the necessary pieces and kits can be purchased without a background check. Because the ATF does not consider an incomplete receiver to be a gun, that incomplete receiver is not subject to federal background check requirements. As a result, anyone can purchase incomplete receivers or kits without a background check, even if that person is prohibited from purchasing or possessing guns. Background checks are only one example of how firearms are regulated. There are many other ways privately made firearms may undermine many evidence-based violence prevention policies intended to limit access to guns by those at high risk of harming themselves or others. For example, someone with a history of domestic abuse legally prohibited to buy or own a gun, or an individual whose gun has been temporarily removed via extreme risk protection order during a time of crisis, may be able to work around those prohibitions by ordering a kit or incomplete receiver and building their own gun. Some states, including California, Connecticut, and New Jersey, have enacted policies seeking to regulate privately made firearms or ghost guns. However, these policies are often limited, and many states have not adopted any policy, which means that privately made firearms and kits can easily move across state lines. This may mean that the federal government needs to act to regulate privately made firearms.
The ATF's proposed rule is the first major effort to address privately made firearms. So what would it do if adopted? It would make several changes to firearm regulation, but there are a few key elements that would affect privately made firearms. First, it would clarify the definitions of firearm and frame or receiver to ensure that most kits and partially complete receivers are included. This would mean that partially complete receivers could only be manufactured by licensed manufacturers and would need to be marked with a serial number. Second, this change would ensure that federally licensed dealers are required to run a background check prior to selling these parts. Third, it would require each federal licensee to mark any privately made firearm it acquires. Importantly, the rule would not restrict persons not otherwise prohibited from having guns from making their own guns at home for personal use.
In summary, privately made firearms, aka ghost guns, are a complex issue and also one that's evolving in real time.
We covered a lot of ground in just a few minutes, but there are a few key takeaways we hope you'll remember and share with others in your community to spread awareness, build consensus, and advocate for evidence-based public health policies to prevent gun violence.
First, ghost guns are basically identical to traditional guns, but lack serial numbers.
Second, even if someone is legally prohibited from possessing a gun, there are still ways to get parts to make a ghost gun, undermining the existing policies we know help keep us safe.
Third, the proposed ATF rule aims to address both of these gaps by applying marking and manufacturing rules identical to those for traditionally manufactured guns. However, the proposed rule does not ban private gun making.
And finally, data is necessary to best understand an issue and design effective solutions. We know a little bit about privately made firearms and how they are used, but we don't fully know how often they are used in violence or the role they play in gun trafficking. Bottom line, we need more data, and efforts to increase collection are warranted.